I've lived out here in the same stretch of dry, golden Texas land for as long as I can remember. My ranch sits on about 70 acres of rolling fields, scattered mesquite trees, and a winding creek that cuts through the back property line like a silver snake. It's been in my family for 3 generations. My granddad built the first fence out of cedar posts by hand, my father rebuilt the barn after a lightning storm split the roof in 2, and I kept the land alive. I mended fences, patched roofs, and ran cattle across the same trails they used before the world got loud with subdivisions and fancy HOA neighborhoods. It was quiet, simple, and mine. I never thought I'd have to defend it, not from outsiders, and definitely not from a group of self-entitled suburban homeowners who thought they owned the earth beneath their manicured lawns. It started about 2 years ago when the developers began pushing east from the highway. You could hear the bulldozers long before you saw the dust rising. They cleared the cedar trees in neat rows, like they were mowing nature itself. Every week, I'd drive my truck past this site on my way into town, watching what used to be open pasture turn into concrete foundations and cookie-cutter homes. They called it Sunrise Estates, but to me, it looked more like Sunset on Freedom. At first, I didn't care. It wasn't on my land, and folks can live where they please. But soon enough, they started creeping closer, surveying stakes popping up on the border of my property, bright orange ribbons flapping in the wind. And that's when I started paying attention, not as a rancher, but as the county surveyor, the man responsible for approving every one of those development maps. Most people don't realize how much power a county surveyor really has. I sign off on where roads go, how far a fence line extends, where water drainage is supposed to run. My job is to protect boundaries, to make sure nobody steps over the invisible lines that define ownership, responsibility, and law. So when I saw those stakes near my south fence line, I didn't just see construction, I saw trouble. I pulled out my map records that night, laid them across the old oak table in my office, and ran my fingers over the contour lines. My ranch boundaries were clear as daylight. The developer's plotted subdivision ended exactly 58 feet short of my property. That meant they had no right to touch, build, or even drive across that section. But something told me they weren't going to respect that. A few months later, the first signs of conflict appeared, not from the builders, but from the new homeowners who'd just moved in. The HOA had been formed almost immediately after the first 30 houses were sold. They had meetings, newsletters, and even their own little online group where they complained about everything from barking dogs to mailbox paint colors. I'd occasionally get calls at the county office from some of them asking about property visuals or view restrictions. I didn't pay much mind to it, until one morning, I woke up to find fresh metal posts driven into the ground along my northern pasture. They ran straight for 200 yards, cutting across my cattle trail, and stopped near my barn. It was a brand new fence, shiny silver wire stretched tight, and it wasn't mine. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Construction crews sometimes stray off the mark. But as I got closer, I saw the small metal tags on the fence posts, property of Sunrise Estates HOA. My stomach tightened. I followed the line all the way back toward the subdivision, and there she was, Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed president of the HOA. She stood at the edge of the newly built cul-de-sac, wearing sunglasses big enough to block out half the sun, holding a clipboard like it was a sword. Even from a distance, I could feel her smugness. I'd heard about her from a few local contractors. The kind of woman who thought the world existed to fit her spreadsheet, bossy, loud, always right. And there she was, giving orders to a couple of workers tightening the wire on my land. I parked my truck, stepped out, and walked over. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Can I ask what you're doing on my property?" She turned, looked me up and down, and said, "Oh, you must be the rancher. We're just putting up the HOA perimeter fence. It's part of our beautification project." Beautification? I raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you're about 60 feet inside my boundary line." She gave a fake smile. Well, according to our maps, this area falls under community green space. Maybe you're mistaken. I almost laughed. Mistaken. I'd been surveying land since before she learned to spell HOA. I said, you might want to check your developer's plot again. That green space ends before that creek line back there. You're on my ranch. Karen crossed her arms, her voice dripping with superiority. Sir, this neighborhood has been approved by the county. Everything we're doing is completely legal. If you have an issue, take it up with the surveyor. That's when I smiled, slow and steady. Ma'am, I said, you're looking at him. Her smirk faltered for the first time, just a flicker, but it was enough to tell me she didn't see that coming. I explained, calm but firm, that they'd crossed the boundary and needed to pull their fence back immediately. She muttered something about calling the developer and walked off in a huff, her clipboard clutched tight. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong, dead wrong. 2 days later, I came home to find the fence not only still there but extended another 100 yards. This time, they'd added a locked gate and a sign, private HOA property, no trespassing. My cattle stood confused on the other side, mooing near the barrier, unable to reach the watering trough. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I tried calling the developer, no answer. Then I called the HOA office number listed on the sign, and who picked up? Karen herself. Well, she said, pretending surprise, if you're referring to the fence, that's now part of our community boundary. You'll need to request permission if you want to access that area. I gritted my teeth. Permission? To use my own land? Until the dispute is settled, she said sweetly. We're following procedure. I didn't yell. Didn't threaten. I just hung up and sat quietly for a while, staring out across the field that had once felt endless and free. Then I remembered something my dad used to say, never start a fight with someone who knows the rules better than you do. And I did know the rules. Every law, every code, every inch of that land's legal description. Karen had just fenced off the wrong man's ranch. The next morning, I loaded my truck with my surveying equipment and drove out to the boundary line. I set up my tripod, checked my GPS coordinates, and marked every post she'd illegally placed. My official county records showed exactly where their property ended, and it wasn't where she thought it did. I filed a report under boundary encroachment by non-owner entity, attached the photos, and signed it with my official county seal. That document meant one thing: the HOA was in violation of county property code. But I didn't stop there. I went down to the zoning office and put in a hold on all further development permits for Sunrise Estates pending a boundary investigation. Within 48 hours, every construction project in that neighborhood came to a halt. Trucks parked. Workers went home. And Karen? She called me 15 times in one day. I didn't pick up a single one. By the end of the week, she finally showed up at my gate in person. Her SUV was spotless, her heels clicking on the gravel like she was walking into a courtroom. You can't do this, she said as soon as I stepped out of my porch. You're abusing your position. I shrugged. I'm enforcing the law. She tried to intimidate me with legal threats, homeowners' rights, and even said something about taking it to the county board. I told her to go ahead, just make sure she brings the original site plans. That shut her up real quick. She didn't have them, and the developer sure didn't want to admit they'd built too close to my land. That's when I knew I had her cornered. But instead of pressing harder, I decided to let her dig her own hole. Over the next few weeks, she doubled down, ordering maintenance crews to mow community lawns that were technically on my side, organizing HOA meetings where she called me the stubborn old rancher blocking progress. Word got around, but most of her neighbors started to see through it. A few even came by my ranch, apologizing quietly, saying they hadn't realized the HOA had crossed my land. Karen's pride, though, wouldn't let her stop. And that pride was about to cost her, and the entire HOA, far more than they could imagine. Because I wasn't just protecting my fence. I was about to teach them the meaning of boundaries, legal, moral, and personal. And this was only the beginning. A week passed after I filed that encroachment report, and you could feel the tension in the air like a storm waiting to break. The construction noise from Sunrise Estates had gone quiet, the usual hum of heavy machinery replaced by silence and gossip. The whole subdivision was on pause, and people didn't like that. Trucks sat idle. Workers smoked cigarettes at the edge of the cul-de-sac, waiting for orders that never came. And at the heart of it all was Karen, still strutting around in her pressed suits, pretending like she had control over something she clearly didn't. I saw her one afternoon while driving into town. She was standing with a group of new homeowners near the end of that same illegal fence line, waving papers in the air, her voice sharp enough to slice through the dry Texas heat. I slowed down just enough to catch a few words: disgrace, abuse of power, old cowboy who thinks he owns the world. I didn't stop. I just tipped my hat and kept driving. Sometimes silence burns hotter than any argument. When I reached the county office that morning, my assistant, Marla, had a pile of messages waiting for me. All from the HOA, she said with a half smile. Apparently they're demanding a formal meeting to resolve the issue. I sighed, rubbing my temples. They want a meeting. Fine. Let's give them one. But we'll do it by the book. By the book, I meant official procedure, every form, every notice, every timestamp documented. If Karen wanted to play bureaucratic games, she was about to find out I'd been playing them since before she learned to spell ordnance. I scheduled a property boundary review meeting for the following week. Notices went out to the developer, the HOA board, and the county land commission. When the day came, I wore my old surveyor's vest and brought every document I had: maps, deeds, aerial photos, GPS coordinates, even my grandfather's original property line survey from 1956. The meeting was held in the small municipal conference room downtown. Beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and that faint smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Karen arrived first, heels clicking, hair perfectly curled, that same oversized clipboard in her hand. Behind her came two HOA board members, looking nervous, and then the developer's representative, a young man in a tailored suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Harris, Karen began the moment I stepped in, her tone sugary but sharp. Thank you for finally agreeing to meet. We're here to resolve this misunderstanding peacefully. Misunderstanding? I said, taking my seat. Ma'am, there's no misunderstanding. You built a fence across my land. She gave a rehearsed laugh. Our records show the boundary falls within the HOA's designated easement zone. The developer assured us the measurements were correct. The developer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Whitmore, that's actually, quiet, Derek, she snapped. I'll handle this. I slid a set of printed maps across the table. Here, I said. These are the official county plats approved during your subdivision's permitting phase. You'll notice this line, right here, is your boundary. And this, I pointed to the red highlighted section, is where your fence currently sits. 62 feet inside my property. Karen glanced at it, her lips tightening. Well, that's debatable. It's not, I replied. That data comes from the same GPS coordinates your developer submitted to my office. These aren't opinions. They're facts. The room went quiet for a few seconds. You could almost hear the sound of her pride deflating. But she wasn't one to back down easily. So what do you suggest, she said finally, her voice cool and defensive. I don't suggest anything. I'm enforcing code. You have 7 days to remove that fence, restore the land to its prior condition, and issue a written apology for the encroachment. Failure to comply will result in civil penalties and loss of permit privileges for any future HOA expansions. The developer's face went pale. Loss of permit privileges? Wait, that affects us, not just the HOA. I looked at him evenly. That's how liability works when you sign off on incomplete surveys. Karen's eyes darted toward him, her composure cracking. You said the boundaries were checked. He stammered, we assumed the line followed the natural ridge. You assumed wrong, I said flatly. The county board members murmured among themselves, clearly leaning my way. I knew the law, and they knew it too. Karen realized she was losing control. Her tone softened, but her eyes still burned. Mr. Harris, she said, leaning forward, surely there's a compromise we can reach. We're neighbors, after all. I met her gaze. Neighbors respect fences. You crossed mine. After that, there wasn't much left to say. The board concluded the meeting by issuing a written notice. The HOA must remove the unauthorized fence and cease all encroachment activity within 7 calendar days. Karen stormed out, muttering something about appealing the decision. The developer lingered behind long enough to shake my hand and mutter, sorry, man. She's intense. Intense is one word for it, I said. Ignorant is another. I thought that would be the end of it. But people like Karen don't take defeat well, they take it personally. 3 days later, I found out she'd filed a formal complaint against me with the county ethics committee. Claimed I had a conflict of interest since I was both the property owner and the official responsible for reviewing HOA developments. It was a smart move, sneaky, desperate, but smart. She figured if she couldn't win on the land, she'd try to attack my credibility. When the letter arrived, I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, reading it slowly. Most men would have panicked. Losing my position would have meant losing the authority that protected my land. But I knew the process. Complaints had to go through verification, hearings, and evidence submission. And every step along the way, I had a paper trail proving I'd handled things by the book. Still, I could see what she was doing. She wanted to drag me through the mud, to make me look like the villain. I could handle that, but what she didn't understand was that in small towns like ours, truth spreads faster than gossip once people see proof. Over the next week, I gathered everything: photos, dated correspondence, permit filings, timestamps. I even brought in a few old survey maps signed by my predecessor, each one proving the same boundary line existed decades before that subdivision ever broke ground. When my hearing came up, the committee barely needed 15 minutes to clear me. The vote was unanimous: no conflict, no misconduct, no violation. But the part that really stung Karen was what came next. The committee issued a recommendation that all HOAs in the county undergo a full boundary compliance audit, a measure I quietly suggested before leaving the room. That meant every HOA, including hers, was about to get a magnifying glass over their property lines, landscaping projects, drainage ditches, and even mailboxes. Bureaucratic karma, you might say. The following month was pure chaos for Sunrise Estates. Inspectors showed up almost daily. They flagged multiple violations: illegal signage, improper streetlight placement, non-compliant drainage slopes. None of that was technically my doing, but I didn't shed any tears watching Karen scramble. She'd wanted to play politics, she just didn't realize I'd already mastered that game. Still, I wasn't vindictive by nature. I would have let it rest once they pulled down that fence, except they didn't. Even after all the warnings, Karen doubled down again. She called a private contractor and had the fence reinforced overnight. Taller posts, heavier wire, even a new padlocked gate installed directly across the cattle path. The gall of it almost made me laugh. She was either unbelievably arrogant or completely delusional. That morning, I walked out to the fence with my coffee in one hand and my phone in the other. I took photos, called the sheriff, and filed an official trespass complaint. The sheriff's deputy, a friend of mine named Rick, came by within the hour. Rick climbed out of his cruiser, chewing on a toothpick. "Heard you got yourself another fence problem," he said. "Same folks," I replied. This time, they went full Fort Knox. He whistled. "That's bold, considering the county order." Bold or stupid, I said. Depends how you look at it. Rick took a few photos, shook his head, and said, I'll file it, but I've got a feeling Karen's gonna make this messy. She already has, I said. But don't worry, I've got something she doesn't. What's that? The original legal plat, and about 50 signatures from her own neighbors who want her gone. Rick grinned. Well, hell. Maybe this'll end quicker than we think. It didn't end quick, but it did end spectacularly. That week, I held a quiet meeting at my ranch with several of the HOA residents who were fed up with Karen. They told me stories about how she fined people for leaving trash cans out too long, made them repaint fences for using unapproved shades of brown, and even threatened to have one guy's truck towed for parking in his own driveway. They were tired, humiliated, and ready for change. Can we remove her? One of them asked. Legally? I said, leaning back in my chair. Yes. You just need a majority vote from homeowners. By the following Friday, I helped them draft a petition, worded carefully, citing HOA bylaws. Within 3 days, more than 60% of the residents signed it. They called for an emergency meeting to vote her out. When the day came, I didn't attend, but I didn't have to. You could hear the shouting from my porch half a mile away. By sunset, word spread fast. Karen was officially removed as HOA president. She tried to fight it, of course, yelling about illegal votes and misinformation, but it didn't matter. Her power was gone. The very neighbors she'd bullied had turned against her. I thought maybe that would be enough poetic justice. But sometimes people like her don't know when to quit. The next morning, I found her SUV parked at my gate again. She was standing there, hands on her hips, eyes red from crying or rage, I couldn't tell which. You think you've won, don't you? She shouted as I approached. I kept my voice calm. Karen, I never wanted to win. I just wanted my land respected. She pointed a finger at me. You ruined my reputation. My home value's dropping because of your little power trip. Your home value dropped because you fenced off someone else's ranch, I said evenly. Actions have consequences. She took a step closer, her voice trembling with anger. You think you're smarter than everyone else because you have a title. But people like me, we make communities. We create order. I smiled slightly. You created chaos. For a long second, neither of us spoke. Wind rattled the fence wire between us. Then she got in her car, slammed the door, and drove off in a spray of dust. I watched her taillights fade and thought maybe, just maybe, this was finally over. But as I've learned in this life, arrogance has a funny way of resurrecting itself. And Karen's next move would make everything that came before look like child's play. Because she wasn't done fighting me. Not even close. It was about a week after Karen got voted out that the real storm began. You'd think losing her HOA crown would have humbled her a little, maybe made her take a step back and think. But people like Karen don't think, they plot. Pride, when bruised, doesn't heal, it festers. And in her case, it turned into something darker, something that went beyond the petty boundaries of a neighborhood squabble. The first sign came one Thursday morning when I drove into town for supplies. As I rolled past the Sunrise Estates entrance, I noticed new banners hanging from the streetlights, bright red signs that read, Stop County Corruption, and Land Rights for Sunrise Estates. At first, I didn't believe what I was seeing. Then I spotted Karen herself standing on the corner with a group of residents, holding a megaphone and waving a sign that said, Remove Harris from office. She'd started a full-blown campaign against me. I parked across the street, just far enough away to watch without being seen. There were maybe 15 people with her, some shouting, others just standing awkwardly like they weren't sure what they'd signed up for. Karen, though, looked fired up. She was shouting about abuse of power and unfair treatment, painting me as some corrupt county official who'd used his authority to steal public land. It was ridiculous, but I knew how rumors work. Truth is like an old fence post, takes years to build, seconds to tear down. By the next day, her little protest made the local paper. Headline read, "Former HOA President Accuses County Surveyor of Land Theft and Misconduct." It was pure fiction, but it got attention. Calls started coming into the office again, reporters, angry residents, even a few curious officials from neighboring counties. Marla looked at me one morning and said, "She's trying to drown you in noise." "She won't succeed," I said, though I could feel the tension settling heavy in my chest. Still, I wasn't one to fight with words in the press. I let my work speak for itself. Over the next few days, I doubled down on field checks, making sure every document I signed was airtight. I even invited a state auditor to review my office's procedures, completely voluntary. If Karen wanted to throw mud, I was going to make sure none of it stuck. But she wasn't finished. The next stunt she pulled was personal. One night, I came home to find my mailbox knocked clean off its post. The metal was dented, tire tracks curving off into the ditch. I replaced it the next morning, thinking maybe some teenager had gotten reckless. 2 nights later, my front gate was spray-painted with the words, "Corrupt Cowboy." That's when I knew this wasn't random, it was her. I called the sheriff again. Rick came out, flashlight sweeping over the mess. "You want me to pull traffic cam footage from the road?" he asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "And make sure to get a copy to the DA's office." He nodded, jaw tight. "You know, she's playing a dangerous game. Harassment, vandalism, this is getting criminal." "She thinks she's untouchable," I said. "Let's show her she's not." 2 days later, Rick called me back. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Karen's SUV, 10:43 p.m., pulling off near my gate. She was caught red-handed. Rick told me they were preparing a misdemeanor vandalism charge. It wasn't much, but it was enough to finally corner her. Or so I thought. The night before her citation was supposed to be delivered, I was woken by barking. My old cattle dog, Buck, was going crazy out back. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, barefoot, the chill biting through my shirt. The smell hit me first, smoke. Not heavy, not a blaze, but something burning. I followed the light toward the edge of the barn and saw it, a smoldering patch of hay, embers glowing orange. Someone had tried to start a fire. I stomped it out with a shovel and called the fire department. They confirmed what I already suspected, the fire had been set intentionally. Accelerant residue on the ground. That same night, Rick showed up again, his face pale under the strobe of his cruiser lights. "She's gone too far," he said. "Damn right," I replied. "This isn't just petty anymore." We both knew who was behind it. But without direct evidence, no cameras, no witnesses, it'd be hard to pin it on her. I could feel the frustration bubbling in my gut. That barn had stood since my grandfather's time. If the fire had caught faster, I could have lost everything. That night, sitting on the porch with Buck at my feet, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just defend myself anymore. I was going to end this, once and for all. The next morning, I drove to the county office and pulled every single record relating to Sunrise Estates. I reviewed their zoning approvals, drainage layouts, environmental compliance reports, everything. It took hours, but I found it, a major oversight buried deep in their original permits. The developers had constructed their main stormwater retention pond 50 feet outside the approved zone. That meant their entire drainage system was technically in violation of state code. That was my leverage. If I filed a report with the Department of Environmental Quality, the HOA could face thousands in fines, and worse, mandatory excavation to relocate the pond. It would cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I didn't file it right away. I wanted Karen to know exactly who she was dealing with first. A few days later, I showed up at her house. She answered the door with that same smug smirk, though her eyes flickered with unease. Well, look who decided to visit, she said. Come to apologize? I took off my hat. No, ma'am. I came to warn you. She crossed her arms. Warn me? About what? You've crossed the line too many times. You vandalized my property, tried to set my barn on fire, and harassed me publicly. I've been patient, but patience runs out. I've got evidence of a code violation that could shut down your entire neighborhood. Her smirk faltered. You're bluffing. I handed her a copy of the aerial photo and the permit overlay. This is your stormwater pond. That blue outline shows where it's supposed to be. The red? That's where it actually sits. She scanned the paper, her face paling. This doesn't prove anything. It proves enough, I said. And if I send this to the state, you'll have inspectors crawling over your land for months. They'll find every violation your developers tried to hide. You'll be paying fines until you sell your house. She stared at me for a long moment, then laughed, shrill, hollow. You think you can scare me with paperwork? No, I said calmly. I think the truth will scare you just fine. I turned and walked away. She shouted something behind me, but I didn't listen. The wind carried her words away. That night, I filed the report. Not out of anger, but out of principle. I'd given her every chance to stop, to fix things, to leave me and my land alone. She chose war, so I gave her one made of law and evidence. Within 2 weeks, the inspectors arrived. Big white trucks with government seals rolled into Sunrise Estates. They set up equipment, took soil samples, measured boundaries, and checked drainage. Neighbors peeked out from behind their blinds as rumors spread like wildfire. When the official findings came back, it was worse than even I expected. The pond wasn't just misplaced, it was leaking into a natural watershed that fed into a county-protected creek. That made it a state environmental violation. The fines were enormous. The HOA was ordered to drain and rebuild the entire pond system, costing nearly $300,000. The developer tried to shift blame, but the HOA board refused to pay, saying the construction was under Karen's supervision. Lawsuits flew in every direction. The neighborhood's property values tanked overnight. And through it all, Karen's name was plastered across every legal document as the person of record during the violation period. The same woman who'd stood on corners shouting about corruption was now the face of mismanagement and failure. One evening, I saw her sitting alone at the edge of the subdivision entrance, her protest signs gone, her clipboard missing. She looked smaller somehow, like the wind had finally gone out of her. I didn't stop or gloat. I just drove by, slow enough for her to see me. Our eyes met for a moment. She didn't yell this time. Didn't say a word. Sometimes, silence is the loudest confession. But life has a strange way of circling back. A few months later, after the dust started to settle, the new HOA board approached me. They wanted help, professional help, to fix what Karen had ruined. They offered to hire me privately to resurvey their boundaries, correct their drainage maps, and make sure the subdivision was fully compliant moving forward. I agreed, on one condition: the HOA would formally acknowledge the encroachment on my ranch and sign a perpetual non-disturbance agreement. In simpler terms, they'd never touch, claim, or build on my land again. The board agreed immediately. A week later, I stood out by the fence line again. The new HOA crew had come out with equipment, cutting down the old posts, rolling up the wire, and hauling it off piece by piece. The sound of metal clinking against the trailer felt like closure. When they were done, one of the new board members, a quiet guy named Tom, walked over, stuck out his hand, and said, "For what it's worth, Mr. Harris, we're sorry. You didn't deserve what she put you through." I shook his hand. "Appreciate it, Tom. Just take care of your folks and respect the line. That's all I ask." He nodded. "You have my word." That night, I stood on my porch watching the sunset bleed orange across the hills, the land stretching open again, unbroken, peaceful. Buck lay at my feet, tail thumping lazily. The air smelled like cedar and fresh hay. I thought about my grandfather, how he used to say, land doesn't belong to people. People belong to the land. Maybe that's why this fight had cut so deep. It wasn't just dirt and fences, it was legacy. But even as peace settled over my ranch, I knew one truth better than anyone: folks like Karen don't disappear quietly. They bide their time, waiting for a chance to come back swinging. For a while, things were calm. Too calm, the kind that makes you suspicious. The subdivision stayed quiet after the environmental fines hit, and the new HOA board kept their heads down, focused on repairing their reputation. Construction trucks came back eventually, not to build more houses, but to dig up that damned retention pond and move it where it should have been in the first place. Watching them work from my porch felt like watching justice unfold in slow motion. Each scoop of mud they hauled out of the ground was another reminder that boundaries matter. For the first time in nearly a year, I started sleeping soundly again. The cattle roamed freely, the fence line was clear, and the only sound at night was the wind pushing through the mesquite trees. I'd even started thinking about restoring the old barn roof that had been half collapsed since spring. It felt good, normal, peaceful. But peace, I've learned, doesn't last long when pride is still out there looking for a fight. I hadn't seen or heard from Karen in months. Last I'd heard, she'd moved to a rental home in the next county, after losing her seat on the HOA and getting hit with a mountain of legal fees. But she wasn't gone, just regrouping. People like her don't fade away quietly. They rebuild their image, tell half-truths until even they start believing them, and then they look for someone new to blame. Her return came subtly, like a whisper before a storm. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail from a law firm in Austin. It was thick, official-looking, printed on crisp white paper with gold lettering across the top. Whitmore and Associates versus County of Belridge and James Harris. My name, right there in black ink. I sat at my kitchen table, the late sunlight streaming through the window, and read it slowly. She was suing me for defamation, abuse of authority, and emotional distress. According to her claims, my malicious actions and false reports had destroyed her professional reputation and caused her severe emotional trauma. She was asking for $500,000 in damages. I laughed at first, an honest, deep laugh that echoed through the kitchen. Then I stopped, realizing how serious this could get. She wasn't just after revenge this time, she was after ruin. She wanted to bury me under paperwork and court dates. I called Rick that evening. "She's suing me," I said. He cursed under his breath. "You're kidding." "Nope. Got the papers right here. Defamation, abuse of authority, emotional distress, the whole 9 yards." Rick sighed. "She's desperate. But lawsuits like that? They're hard to win without proof. She's bluffing." "Maybe," I said, folding the letter. "But bluffing can still cost time and money." I wasn't the kind of man to back down, though. I called my attorney, an old friend named Frank Dalton, who'd worked with me for years on land disputes. Frank was sharp, steady, and had the patience of a saint. When I told him the story, he chuckled. "Sounds like she's throwing her last punch. Don't worry, Jim, we'll handle this." The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, document exchanges, and sworn statements. Karen's lawyers tried to paint me as some kind of corrupt official who used his authority to destroy her civic standing. My attorney countered with facts, photos, permits, and county records that showed her fence violation, her vandalism incident, and the environmental report that had nothing to do with me. It became clear pretty fast that her case was built on sand. But what she lacked in evidence, she made up for in noise. She started showing up at local council meetings again, complaining publicly about unfair government treatment. She even gave an interview to a regional blog, spinning the same story about how she was the victim of a good old boys network. It didn't work like it used to. The community had seen too much by now. People knew her reputation, knew what she'd done. Every time she tried to play the victim, someone reminded her of that illegal fence, that padlocked gate, those fines. But she didn't care about truth anymore. She cared about headlines. The first court hearing was scheduled for late September, and I remember that day like it was carved into memory. The morning was cool, sky bright as polished steel. I wore my old gray suit, plain, respectful, and steady, and walked into the courthouse with my head high. Karen was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She looked different, thinner, sharper, but her eyes still had that same cold fire. When she saw me, she smirked, like this was her moment of triumph. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Teresa Caldwell, started proceedings promptly. She'd read all the filings beforehand and wasted no time. Karen's lawyer gave a long, dramatic speech about abuse of power and the psychological toll his client had endured. He painted her as a whistleblower wronged by the system. When it was our turn, Frank stood up, calm and deliberate. He presented the evidence, photographs of the illegal fence, official county maps, recorded phone calls, even copies of the vandalism report. And then he dropped the final hammer, the security footage of Karen's SUV the night my gate was vandalized. The courtroom went dead quiet. Karen's face drained of color. Her lawyer stammered something about inadmissible evidence, but the judge shut him down immediately. The footage was obtained legally from a public roadway, she said. It's admissible. Frank turned to the judge. Your Honor, this case is not about emotional distress. It's about accountability. My client enforced the law, protected his property, and did his job with integrity. The plaintiff's claims are not only false, they're vindictive. When the judge ruled, her tone was steady, even. Case dismissed, with prejudice. Plaintiff's claims are baseless. Furthermore, the court finds evidence of frivolous litigation. The plaintiff will cover the defendant's legal fees. Karen froze, eyes wide, jaw tight. It was over. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The gavel hit the desk, echoing like thunder. I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. I just stood, nodded respectfully to the judge, and walked out of that courtroom free. Outside, the air smelled sweeter than it had in months. The courthouse steps felt lighter beneath my boots. Rick was waiting by his truck, grinning. Heard the good news already, he said. Guess karma's got a county badge after all. Guess so, I said, smiling for real this time. But the story didn't end there. As I was walking to my truck, I saw Karen standing by the parking lot, alone, staring off into the distance. For a moment, I almost pitied her. She looked hollow. All the fight, the pride, the power, it had all burned away, leaving nothing but exhaustion. She didn't say a word as I passed. Didn't even look at me. That evening, I went back to the ranch. The sky was painted gold and purple, the sun sinking low over the hills. I poured myself a whiskey, sat on the porch, and just listened, the crickets, the soft rustle of wind through dry grass, Buck snoring at my feet. I thought about everything that had happened. The fence. The fire. The lawsuits. And underneath it all, one simple truth: power without respect destroys everything it touches. Karen thought control meant ownership. But control is temporary. Respect is earned. Months went by, and life finally fell back into rhythm. The new HOA board worked with the county to remap the subdivision correctly. They even asked if I'd be willing to attend a town hall meeting to speak about property rights and boundaries. I agreed, not out of pride, but because I wanted people to understand how quickly small disputes can spiral when ego gets involved. The meeting was held in the community hall, the same place Karen had once stood shouting about corruption. This time, it was full of quiet, attentive faces. I talked about respect, for land, for law, for neighbors. I told them how my grandfather's fence posts weren't just markers of property, but symbols of trust. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. Afterward, a young couple approached me. The woman smiled shyly. "We bought one of the new homes here," she said. "We've heard stories, but we just wanted to say, thank you. You saved this place." I smiled. Just doing my job. But inside, it meant something. Maybe, after all that chaos, something good had come out of it, a reminder for everyone that honesty and patience still matter in a world obsessed with control. Later that night, I walked down to the creek that bordered my ranch, the moonlight glinting off the water. The air was cool, crisp. I could see the reflection of the stars rippling in the current. I thought about my father, my grandfather, and everything they'd taught me about land and legacy. I knelt down, let my fingers trail through the cold water, and whispered, "It's safe now." But deep down, I knew Karen's story wasn't completely over. I didn't expect her to rise again, not after that courtroom defeat, but trouble has a way of echoing through the places it once ruled. And sometimes, before peace truly settles, there's one last shadow that needs to fade. And that shadow was still out there, waiting for me just beyond the fence line. The first cool winds of autumn carried something different across the ranch that year, a calm I hadn't felt in what seemed like ages. The land had healed. The fences stood straight, the grass had grown tall again, and the cattle roamed like they used to, unbothered and unafraid. Every nail, every repaired post, every survey marker I'd hammered back into the ground felt like reclaiming more than property, it was reclaiming peace. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe easy, the way a man does when the dust finally settles after a storm. But peace never stays forever, not on land that's been fought over. It began with a phone call late one evening from the county clerk's office. I was sitting at my dining table, nursing a mug of coffee, the house wrapped in the soft hum of night when the phone rang. The clerk's voice sounded uneasy, like someone who didn't quite know how to break bad news. She told me that a few newly submitted property development plans had been flagged for irregularities, plans tied to a company with a familiar name buried in the paperwork, Whitmore Holdings, LLC. The moment she said it, I knew. Karen was back. I felt that cold twinge in my gut again, the same one I'd felt the day she first fenced off my ranch. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window toward the dark horizon of my land. She hadn't gone away. She'd just changed tactics. If she couldn't win through the HOA, she'd go corporate. She'd reinvent herself under a new name, a new title, and try again to claw her way back into control. The plans she'd filed weren't for homes this time, they were for a community recreation center and a green access trail meant to connect the subdivision to the creek that bordered my ranch. On paper, it sounded like a public benefit. But I'd seen this playbook before. It wasn't about community, it was about expansion. And that creek? It was my southern boundary. I knew she was coming for it. I spent the next morning in the county records office, combing through every line of her application. She'd submitted surveys, legal descriptions, and environmental statements, all of which looked polished and official, but they weren't accurate. Her maps extended 27 feet into my property line. It wasn't an accident. It was precision theft, drawn neatly with the stroke of a pen. She had underestimated one thing, I was still the county surveyor. That afternoon, I filed an immediate boundary dispute report and placed a legal hold on her permit. Within days, the development was frozen until further review. I thought that would be enough to make her back off, but she wasn't done playing. A week later, she showed up at my ranch. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year, and when she stepped out of that black SUV, she looked like a ghost of herself, tired, worn, but her eyes still carried that old flame of defiance. She didn't ask to come in, didn't even look around. She just stood there at the gate, framed by the rising dust, staring at me with that same mix of contempt and calculation. She told me, flat and cold, that she had every legal right to proceed and that my interference would only make things worse for me. Her voice had lost the edge of arrogance it once carried. It was quieter now, almost brittle, like a blade dulled from too many fights. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just told her the truth. The maps were fraudulent, the application was under review, and any further attempt to encroach would end the same way it always did, with her losing everything again. Then I walked away. That night, a storm rolled in. The kind of storm that changes the air itself, dark, heavy clouds pressing down on the land, thunder crawling across the sky like distant artillery. I watched from the porch as the wind bent the mesquite trees, the rain coming in sheets. Lightning flickered across the ridge where her old fence used to stand, illuminating the fields in quick bursts of white and silver. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the end of it all. Sometime after midnight, I was woken by the sound of engines in the distance. Headlights flickered down near the creek. I grabbed my jacket, pulled on my boots, and drove my pickup down the muddy trail. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle by then, the kind that soaked you to the bone. When I reached the creek, I saw 2 trucks parked near the water, and figures moving around with flashlights. One of them was Karen. She was shouting at someone, waving papers in her hand, her voice barely audible over the wind. The men with her, contractors, probably, were trying to unload posts and wire. Even in the darkness, I could tell what they were doing. They were trying to put up a new fence. I pulled up, headlights glaring through the rain, and stepped out. The mud squelched beneath my boots as I walked toward them. The men froze when they saw me. Karen turned slowly, rain running down her face, her hair plastered to her cheeks. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. The wind howled between us, carrying the scent of wet soil and iron. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in stature, but in spirit. All that ambition, all that fire, it had burned her from the inside out. She said something about having the right to secure the area, but her voice faltered halfway through. She knew she'd lost before she even started. I told her to take her men and leave before the sheriff arrived. She didn't move at first. She just stood there, staring at the muddy ground, the rain beating down around her. Then, finally, she nodded. She turned, gave a half-hearted order to her crew, and they started loading the posts back into the truck. Within minutes, they were gone, their taillights vanishing into the rain. I stayed there for a while after they left, standing by the creek as the storm faded. The water rushed high from the rainfall, reflecting the moonlight between drifting clouds. The land felt alive again, purged, maybe even cleansed. When I walked back up toward the house, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not pride, something quieter. Closure. The next morning, I filed a full report on the attempted encroachment. The county revoked every pending permit associated with Whitmore Holdings, citing fraudulent mapping and unauthorized activity. Within weeks, Karen's company dissolved under state investigation. This time, there would be no comeback. Months passed, and winter settled in. The air grew crisp, the grass brittle under frost. Life returned to normal, not the same normal as before, but a better one. The ranch was thriving again. Rick and I fixed the last of the boundary posts, repainting them bright white so they'd stand out clear for years to come. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I'd ride out to the southern edge of the property and stop by the creek. I'd watch the sun rise over the water and think about everything that had happened. There was no hatred left in me anymore. Just a deep, quiet understanding of what land really means. It's not about control, or power, or fences. It's about legacy. Responsibility. Respect. One morning, while walking the boundary, I found something half buried near one of the old fence posts. It was a broken signpost, the one Karen had put up long ago when she'd first fenced off my land. The paint was faded, the metal bent, but I recognized it instantly. I stood there for a moment, looking down at it, the past and present colliding in one small piece of rusted steel. Instead of throwing it away, I picked it up and carried it back to the barn. I hung it on the wall above my workbench, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every man, I think, has a line he stands behind. For some, it's pride. For others, it's family. For me, it's land. Not because it's mine, but because it's what my father and grandfather built their lives on. It's the earth that holds their sweat, their struggle, their history. Now, whenever I look at that old sign, I remember how close I came to losing all of it, not to a natural disaster, not to time, but to someone's arrogance. And I remember that sometimes, standing your ground isn't about fighting, it's about knowing where you belong and refusing to be moved. By spring, the ranch had fully come alive again. The grass waved in the wind, calves kicked up dust in the fields, and the horizon glowed gold every sunset. The world had righted itself. I never saw Karen again. Word around town was that she'd left the state for good, maybe somewhere out west. I didn't wish her harm. If anything, I hoped she'd finally found peace in letting go. Because I had. One evening, I rode out to the far ridge overlooking the whole valley. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in deep amber and violet. I could see the creek glimmering like a ribbon of glass through the fields. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and rain-soaked soil. It was beautiful, untouched, eternal. I sat there for a long while, the horse shifting quietly beneath me, watching the last light fade. And as the stars began to appear, one by one across the endless sky, I whispered to the land that had tested me, broken me, and finally healed me, this is home. Always was. Always will be. Then I turned back toward the house, the porch light glowing faintly in the distance, and rode on through the darkening fields, toward peace, toward purpose, and toward the quiet, steady life I'd earned back one hard lesson at a time.